Let's be proud of Northern Ireland. I want to get the front foot and advocate for it and tell people why staying in United Ireland, they can feel Irish, but have the security of being in the UK. So I think there's a job to be done, but I think we can convert people to unionism. I want to see unionism grow and not just have what it holds. The Ulster Unionist Party helped deliver peace. Now it needs to fix our governance and get Northern Ireland firing in all cylinders for the next 100 years. The left and right are disastrous. Look, let me make it clear, Nigel Farage, you could be the next Prime Minister, right? I could end up having to meet him, right? Nigel Farage, I think, is a disaster. I think it's a disaster for the United Kingdom. Too many years, unionism has made short-term decisions that have harmed the union. We need to think in the long term. People, often say the Republicans have a long game. They play a long war. Instead of complaining about that, unionism needs to think more strategically and actually think about protecting the union. What does the union look like in 2050? That's what I'm beginning to think about.
Jon Burrows, you're very welcome to the BelTel.
Thank you, Ciarán.
Jon, as I was thinking about this podcast and as I was asking people about the podcast, some people said to me, this is going to be a great challenge because you don't know what to talk about. And other people said, well, you gotta just ask him anything. Because from our point of view, from the media's point of view, and from the political point of view, you're very much a blank canvas. So before I get into some of the, not the issues, but some of the dynamics around the UUP, can I ask you a few questions so the public can get to know you?
Absolutely.
Tell us about your politics. And I'm going to ask you in terms of your politics. When I mean politics, not necessarily just about Northern Ireland.
I suppose my politics are driven by, and I don't want to sound like a cliche, I'm not really ideological. Mm-hmm. So I'm not into these labels, progressive, liberal, traditional, right, left. I want to move things forward. My politics would be, first of all, based in real values. That's the first thing. Service. A belief in your country. Moral courage, integrity, honour. I grew up in a uniform family. My father was in the Royal Ulster Constabulary George Cross. My mother was a mental health nurse. My grandfather fought in the Somme, helped liberate Europe. My great-grandfather, he fought with his two brothers in World War I. That was the steeped environment that we grew up in. Smell of boot polish and brasso and leather polish. Service and duty, but also looking out for each other and your neighbours were part of my values, and that's what's driven me in public service. Police, I was a food bank volunteer, I'm now in politics. And then I suppose alongside that is actually looking at what works. And that's why I talk about policies that aren't ideological, that are based in facts, common sense, and what needs done. That's what we should be doing and not baking policy in the back of ideology.
Well, many people would say that, that it's very difficult to divorce common sense from ideology, and people like to know where people sit on a variety of issues. Yeah. Can I ask you, therefore, to clarify this? And it might be a difficult question. If you lived in England, who would you vote for?
Tricky one. I certainly, if I lived in England, I would be most like a centrist Tory, in the sense that I have a real belief in things like collectivism in the good sense that there's a society out there that should work together for each other, a belief in our country, but also a belief in the individual. I think the state should not encroach on the individual unless it really has to. Now, it has a duty to do. It has to protect us, but it should use your money very, very wisely. It should treat it like it's its own. It should use its powers lightly. And it should prioritise actually doing the very basics for us and protecting us. So I have a streak of sort of libertarianism in that, with also a strong sense that the state is there primarily to keep us safe, keep us secure, and give us the opportunity to make something of our lives, while also having that really solid, I think, safety net for those who need it, for compassion. So I struggle when you say, who would you vote for in England?
Well, I think in fairness, you've been very clear.
I probably would be a centrist Tory, but
what would have been described? I think you've described yourself as what they would have described when I was at university as a one nation Tory. A rare enough breed nowadays, but I think that's the vibe I'm getting.
Well, look, I think the left and right are disastrous. Look, let me make it clear, Nigel Farage, you could be the next Prime Minister, right? I could end up having to meet him, right? Nigel Farage, I think, is a disaster. I think he's a disaster for the United Kingdom. I think he's a maverick. I think he actually is feted by some unionists, but actually he has taken for a few quid payment to say, was it up the RA for a TikTok video? He speaks admiringly of republicanism, and he is a man incapable of properly leading our country, in my view. So, I'm very much against the far right or the right that's represented by the likes of Nigel Farage. At the same time, I'm horrified that our country nearly voted in Jeremy Corbyn, who would have been another disaster. So I'm kind of a view that most people in our country sit around the centre of our politics, maybe centre left, maybe centre right. There's a recent poll out and it showed, in 0 to 10, if 0 was far left and 10 was far right, where do people sit? Actually, it showed the majority of people in Northern Ireland sit between 5 and 7. I would say the same exists right across the UK. And yet the political elites, the media elites, seem to talk about it in polarised terms, left and right. I think we've actually a lot more in common, the average person, than our media and political elites maybe think.
Well, sometimes if you take away labels and you talk to people about individual issues. For example, people might describe themselves as quite hard right, but actually when they're asked about things around welfare, specific issues, someone's lost their job, should they get help from the state? Like almost everyone says yes. So, you're talking about in terms of specific issues.
Yeah, I think this is where the labels are really unhelpful. Let me give you an example. So some people said, would Jon Burrows be a shift to the right of the Ulster Unionist Party? And I said, well, no, perhaps a perception of that is the fact that I've been particularly strong in challenging Sinn Féin on the rewriting of history. Because what happened in our troubles, whether it was loyalist or Republican, was repugnant and was despicable, what was inflicted upon the good people of Northern Ireland. I will challenge anyone who tries to rewrite history with absolute clarity and conviction. That does not make me right-wing, it makes me morally correct. And that is a position that we should be in. Likewise, being a strong unionist who advocates for the union, who believes passionately that is the best for our country, does not make me to the right. It simply happens to be I'm a passionate unionist. In the same way you can be a passionate nationalist and be in the SDLP, it doesn't make you bigoted or anything like that. So in those senses, I am strong in my beliefs and passionate against violence, against sectarianism, in favour of the United Kingdom. But when it comes to policy, I think we should actually have policies that work for the best interests of the people of Northern Ireland and take ideology out of it.
But of course, people don't always agree. They don't agree in the past. They don't agree in history, and even professional historians will not agree on everything. There is a lot of interpretation. But I'll take your point. I don't want to get bogged down in it. And we can talk about policies because people will not only be informed by what they think is right and by what data, but of course you will have to enter the arena of electoral politics and everything which goes with that. And the truth and common sense, they struggle to survive in that environment.
Well, I'm just going to come back to you on one point, and this is a really important point about rewriting history. People now say, and I think it's Overton's window has shifted, and you have people saying, well, there's a contested view of the past. No, we need to retain moral clarity. Walking into a pub and shooting everyone in it because they were Catholic was wrong. There was no justification for that. Doing the same because they were Protestant in the name of republicanism was wrong. Killing people in cold blood was wrong. Professional historians can write whatever they want. That is the moral certainty that we need to preserve. And there's a duty on those who are in politics today to preserve that moral duty, and I will do so. But I'll take your question, but I just want to make that point. I cannot allow and will not allow, as much as I want to look forward and work with people, anyone to change the facts of this country's past. And I'm proud of the fact that during the Troubles, the vast majority of people voted for parties that rejected violence.
One of the issues that you may have, I'm accepting everything you say, but one of the issues you may have, and you want to defend that legacy and you want to defend the integrity of history, is that is a grand vision in a sense, and perhaps it shouldn't be. But then you're going to get into the nitty gritty of politics, which start today and which impact tomorrow. So some people might listen to this and go, "Oh, we're going to get bogged down and stuff here."
Look, not at all. And that's where I say, and I couch that by saying, if a small part of my job, and it's a necessary and vital part of my job, is to make sure that people don't rewrite the past. That is part of my job that I will do. It is a duty. It is important as people of Northern Ireland. Thankfully, after World War II, we didn't have a debate for years about whether it was right or wrong to try and annihilate the Jewish race. Unfortunately, there are people who want to debate the right and wrongs of murdering 3,000 of our citizens, and I will not allow them to succeed, and I'll play my part. That doesn't mean that I won't move night and day, flex every sinew in my body to try and move Northern Ireland forward, to make things work and to work with people. Because you know what? You don't actually have to particularly like people to work with them. It's professional relationships. There are businesses out there that do a job, and there's people within them who might dislike or like each other. They get on with it. Politics in Northern Ireland, the people who are paid to do it on behalf of the people of Northern Ireland need to get on with
it. You mentioned things like, values and integrity and country. Are you a man of faith?
Yeah, I have a faith. I have a Christian faith.
Because it would be irrelevant in most countries. Well, it's not always irrelevant, frankly. I mean, it always comes out in the end. But I think it is a question which people would expect me to ask, if you don't mind.
That's Northern Ireland. People ask those questions. I grew up in a Christian family, but one in which, interestingly, the phrase Protestants was I can't remember ever being used as my parents. They described themselves as Christians and a Christian family. If they wanted to give a denomination, it was Methodist. But we were brought up with yes, Christian values, but compassion was at the heart of all of those. And that's why in my life, even where I have values that I personally believe in, I don't believe in judging others, and I believe in being compassionate with others. And I think that is something that is really important in my personal value system, is you can be as principled as you want, but remember, everyone else has had a different life than you. They've had all difficult choices. And actually, on things like, and I heard the discussions on many, many social issues, you can have your view on something, but you can couch it and deliver it in a way that's compassionate, dignified, and doesn't actually alienate people. And that's, for me, the challenge in politics when you're dealing with issues like faith.
And I think we might return to that, because we're living in a certain age where those values of civility have been are of all the values that are being dispensed with. I think this sort of sense of civility and decency is the one we'll struggle with, and I might return to that. But I want to talk about the UUP.
Yeah.
Now, you have to admit, becoming leader 6 months into joining the party is unusual, incredible, and perhaps unprecedented.
Well, it's certainly unprecedented, although Mike Nesbitt did it in 11 months. I felt I fitted well into politics. I had a career in public service. I was well used to doing media interviews. I recall doing my first sort of live media interviews with the likes of Enna McClafferty and Sarah Brett, who were then the tag team running Radio Foyle. I was promoted inspector in 2007, and I've done hundreds of interviews with journalists, and I've really enjoyed that. I'm used to communication. I'm used to leading people. I'm used to building alliances, problem solving. So you have these skills that you bring into politics. I've always been politically aware. I followed politics. I'm interested in it, and I felt comfortable in it. And I got a sense within the Ulster Unionist Party amongst its members that they wanted me to run. I did some soundings, and I decided to run along with Diana Armstrong, who thinks an outstanding politician. And I feel there's a time for renewal in the Ulster Unionist Party. The building on those solid traditions that it has, that actually replicate my values of honesty and decency and service and doing the right thing, even the difficult thing, for the people of Northern Ireland. We now need to renew ourselves, rebuild, and get back on the front foot as the biggest unionist party in Northern Ireland, because Northern Ireland needs us to lead it in the next phase. I said in my launched my campaign that we have peace in Northern Ireland, but peace isn't enough. The Ulster Unionist Party helped deliver peace. Now it needs to fix our governance and get Northern Ireland firing on all cylinders for the next 100 years.
Some of the values you've discussed, unfortunately, I think everyone who gets involved in politics, a lack of clarity sometimes becomes a necessity. A little hypocrisy is hard. It is very hard to avoid, and certainly ambiguity becomes nearly necessary, because some of the things you've mentioned there, which are great assets to almost everyone, but some new entrants in politics, and they come in from the media. We've had Mike Nesbitt. They come from business. come from the services. They find whenever they get down into that game that I've always found that people can struggle, who haven't done the time coming up to the party. I mean, you have to accept you will have challenges. Of course you will.
Well, look, everyone has challenges, but nothing that is worthwhile is easy. I believe there's a need in Northern Ireland for strong leadership and renewal and unionism generally and across Northern Ireland politically. People can judge me, and the members were going to judge me on my performance as I've been in Stormont. I think I've given effective scrutiny. I think I've been a good performer. I think I've settled well into Stormont. And I think I have the drive and the energy and the values that can make a difference. Now, I will need, of course, the support of a team. You have to rely on others. We all have different strengths and weaknesses, but that's life. And look, we have to, I also think, have a culture of saying this. Politics has stagnated in Northern Ireland. We have people in politics who've been here for years. Do you know what they spend a lot of their time dealing with? They spend a lot of their time debating what happens in Gaza, what happens across the world, when the grit box at the end of the development hasn't got salt on it when you need it because there's a cold snap. So I'll not be like the politician who's been around for 20 or 30 years. We need freshness in our politics. We need to fuse the experience that's there with some fresh talent. We badly need to bring in people from other public services to bring fresh thinking, new ideas, because Stormont actually needs a reset. Look, when I first went into Stormont, Ciarán, I was astonished when I spent hours every week debating what are called non-binding motions. People out there might be astonished if they knew that you would spend time, there'd be a minister there, there'd be the whole apparatus of state, the people in Hansard who record what's said, all the political parties, they're debating these motions. They don't mean anything. They've no more legal meaning than what your local sixth form school debates and has a vote on at the end of it. Yet, when it comes to legislation, it's sometimes rushed and we pass laws that aren't properly scrutinised. We haven't dealt with the underlying issues in Northern Ireland. Crumbling public services, our infrastructure's crumbling. We have economic inactivity that's one of the highest in Europe. And we have people debating non-binding motions. Stormont needs a reset, and fresh thinking can help bring that about.
Well, it's up to the people to reset Stormont ultimately, because they will elect in the MLAs.
We're offering to lead that change and offer the solutions that need brought in.
I understand that. Now, you brought up the Gaza issue yourself. I mean, people would be very passionate about this on both sides. For historical reasons, it wasn't always the case. Unionists tend to side with the Israeli case, and nationalists side with the Palestinian case. That's the way it is. You can't really expect people not to respond to what their constituents are passionate about and what they expect their politicians to do. It mightn't be about the grit box, but people may well feel that, from their point of view, that it's more important.
Well, let me just be as clear as I can be on this. We have council chambers up and down the country where people are debating what happens around the world. I sometimes think it's just in self-indulgence. They decide they're going to have this debate about what's happening around the world and pass a motion that has absolutely no impact. Do you see if they want to do it? And I know there's important things around the world. If there's a tragedy, yes, we should open a book of condolence. But the amount of time that is spent dealing with things that aren't related to the core business in Northern Ireland is a scandal. And if those politicians want to do it in your own time. Do it at your own expense. Form a club after the council business and do it in your days off. The people of Northern Ireland need real leadership. They need core services delivered. We have an infrastructure system that is crumbling so that in parts of Northern Ireland you cannot build a house because the sewage system is at capacity, which means people are moving out of villages. The villages are dying. The school population is getting smaller. These are the issues of our time. And we have people debating what's happening in Gaza who are councillors and who are in the assembly. And it goes across both sides. Yes, we need to be aware of the geopolitical world we live in. Yes, we need to show compassion when something happens across the world. But our focus should be on delivering for the people of Northern Ireland. Politics has failed to do that sufficiently. And it's time now they focused on delivering for the people here, who pay their wages, by the way.
That's your position. It'll be up to the people to decide in terms of elections going forward just about that. Now, I'm fascinated by the fact that you were the head of discipline for the PSNI. And I'm just wondering, how is that going to be a help or a hindrance in terms of leading the UUP? Because your MLAs, who are the people ultimately you will be leading from day to day, yes, you're elected or chosen by the bulk of the party, but it has been compared to herding ducks. And there have been many leaders since David Trimble. In all fairness to all of them, they've done their job, but none of them are going to go down in history.
Well, many of them have done an outstanding job, and I'm privileged to walk in their footsteps. Look, the police is a different career, but there's certain values and approaches. And you mentioned the head of discipline. Look, one of the reasons I was appointed head of discipline was this. I believe in moral courage, and the leaders are responsible to do certain things. If we do something wrong as a party, an individual or myself or collective as a party, moral courage is standing up and saying, we got it wrong, we're going to make it right. If someone comes under unfair attack or criticism, moral courage as a leader is standing up and saying, sorry, I'm defending my people. That attack's not fair. That's why I stood up for the officer in the Armour Road who was unlawfully suspended and went against my own chief constable and deputy chief constable.
And you're referring to an incident, I know we've discussed about it on the podcast before, just in case anyone's listening. This was an incident on the Armour Road where 2021, where officers intervened. Is it during COVID?
Yeah, it was during COVID. There was a memorial for the terrible atrocity at the Sean Graham's bookmakers, where loyalists murdered innocent people, and that memorial had concluded. It was in breach of COVID regulations. The police officer tried to speak to the organizer to get some details, and there was pressure put on the chief constable, it's a matter of public record, to suspend the officer, not because of what he did, but because political pressure was brought to bear on him, and that decision was ruled unlawful. The police officer was exonerated. That was very difficult for me to stand up to a chief constable, deputy chief constable. I was the sole figure in the media standing up to that and exonerated the officers and exposed, working with others, the political policing. So when you say discipline and leadership, it's actually about a number of things. One, standing up and saying we get things wrong. Two, standing up for people when they're actually under unfair criticism. But three, having the moral courage also. When things need dealt with, you deal with them. I have an approach that says, look, I'm open, honest and direct. If there's difficulties with colleagues, we'll sit down and work them through. We're a team. We need to get on and we need to deliver for the people of Northern Ireland. And we need to remember that's what we're in politics for. And other issues, we'll deal with them and work them out as a team.
Yes, but politicians, of course, will have their own mandates, and sometimes in all political parties, they will not submit to. They don't always submit to party discipline as easy, as willingly as leaders would like. There's always going to be challenges, and there's challenges to leadership. I mean, that's part of it. And I just wonder, in terms of your background and your approach to things, because that's a very business-like approach to it. You are dealing with people, you're dealing with egos, you're dealing with ideas, you're dealing with strong opinions, and you're also dealing with people who perhaps have to answer to an electorate. They also have to answer to local constituency parties as well. There's a lot of people you have to answer to.
Well, I believe that Dan and myself have broad and deep support across the constituency members and members of the Ulster Unionist Party. Very significant support. You say I deal with things in a business way. Look, I've got empathy, compassion. You work with people. You're not very many people who've worked with me for a long time who say I'm anything other than a decent, caring person. But when I'm discussing issues with you, I will speak in an open and honest way. Things just have to be sorted. And I'll tell you what, because there are companies up and down the country, and there are public sector workers up and down the country, and there are people up and down the country who do a lot harder work than politicians. They get out of their bed and they go into the driving rain or the snow or the heat, and they don't get as well paid. They don't get as many holidays, and they get on with their job. So I will work with everybody. But my values are, we are a team that's got to deliver for the people of Northern Ireland. It's a privilege to serve. Let's work as a team. We'll resolve things collegiately. I'll listen. I'll understand, but I'll also lead. And you know what? We'll resolve this.
Well, time will
there's
tell.
An issue to resolve.
Time will tell. We'll say. I don't think politics continues the way it always has done. Now, in terms of growth for the UUP, the UUP have been in decline, a long-term decline for a very long time. I just wonder where you see potential growth. Where, like, in terms of which demographics are you looking for? Which geographical areas are you looking at? Because you have to grow. You can't stay where you are.
Well, we can't stay where we are. And if we always do what we've always done, we'll always get what we've always got. I believe we need to arrest that decline. That's not a slight of anyone who's led before. There are various reasons why we have declined and is now plateaued, if you like. We have a core vote. We can't take that for granted. But here's my offering to the people of Northern Ireland. First of all, I want to offer strong unionism that's actually more strategic and smart than we've seen in the last 20 years. There's been mistakes made. Brexit was a mistake. The Ulster Unionist Party called it right with their head, not their heart. There's been other mistakes made around changes to the Belfast Agreement. We went from 108 seats at the Assembly to 90. 16 of the 18 seats that we lost were Unionist. That wasn't a good decision by the DUP in their negotiations with Sinn Féin. There were many other decisions that have been made that have not been good. Unionism has not actually strengthened in the last 15 years. It hasn't been well led. So I think we need to be far more strategic. The second thing I'll say to people is I want to bring pride in Northern Ireland and advocate for the union on rational, logical terms. That's my unionism. But the offering I make to the people of Northern Ireland around other things is this. Do you want more honesty? Do you want more truth spoken? Are you up for change to how we do business? Because if you are, the Ulster Unionist Party wants to lead that. I want to change how Stormont does business. I want to reform it. I want us to lead that. I want our party to start leading the conversation of how we get more women into Stormont. My party has not done well enough. We have one MLA out of 9 that is female, now going to be the deputy leader. That's not good enough. We have 25% of our councillors that are female. That's not good enough. But we need to do things like encourage more of our councillors who are female. What is stopping you becoming an MLA? What is it that is stopping you moving to the next level of your political career? And that's why Diana and myself are going to have those conversations to see, are there practical things we can do to support women in our party? Because we need to attract more women, we need to attract more young people, and we need to give a fresh offering to the people of Northern Ireland. And we need to offer policies that are exciting to people, that relate to their lives. That's why, for example, we're going to be talking like never before to people in communities and saying, what is it that we need to do better for you? So I stopped 3 young girls in schoolgirls. I was out doing a walk and talk in Ballymena. One of them said to me, I want to be a Queen's student and do medicine. But it's very unlikely I'm going to get there, even if I get 3 A's. Because the way the funding is for our students, Northern Ireland students are at a disadvantage to get into Northern Ireland University. She'll likely have to go to England. That can't be right. I've reflected on that. We need to do something about that. The other one wants to be a vet. The other girl wants to be a vet. We don't have a Royal Veterinary College in Northern Ireland, so she is going to have to go to England to learn to be a vet, despite the fact that this place actually provides 25% of the food for the whole of the UK. We're a farming capital of Northern Ireland, and we don't have a veterinary college. These are things people are telling me, and I'm thinking, these are the things we need to deal with. I've been going around schools, and I've been speaking to principals who tell me the biggest issue of our time is the impact of devices and social media on young people. So we're going to formulate policies and propose laws that are going to deal with that. We're going to be anchored in what matters to people most, and we're going to deliver that in a common sense way. That is the offering I'm going to make to people of Northern Ireland. It's going to be delivered with honesty and in a straightforward way and with straight talking. And I hope they are interested in that. But here's the thing. I want to cut across when you say to me, what demographics are you targeting? That offering's to all the people of Northern Ireland. And I hope they consider it. And I want more people to support the UUP.
You're very clear on your pitch. I would suggest that probably the barrier for your female councillors becoming MLAs is your sitting MLAs. So that could be an issue going forward. You know, if you're going to, unless you win a plethora of new seats, you know, you're going to have to look at your existing authoring.
Well, no, I think there's one first. I'm interested in growing the UUP, not replacing people, actually growing it. But the second thing is we've already spoken to some female councillors. And let me give you an example. Because what I'll not do in politics is come out with woke slogans and hashtags. Oh, we need to be, you know, more female friendly. We've already started conversation with female councillors and said, would you be interested in going for Stormont at some stage in the future? What would put you off, or what would be? And they said, well, look, you know, I have a family, for example, a young family. So there's things in Stormont we could do differently. Let me give you one example of what other legislators do. If you were stuck at Stormont, you can be stuck at Stormont late at night for legislation, 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and perhaps you're not required to speak on the debate. You're in a large party, but you will have to stay there because you have to physically vote. Whereas other legislators have a position where you can have paired votes. So you can have someone who's voting yes and someone who's voting no could pair their vote and be able to go home. That's a practical thing that allows someone who's got a family or caring responsibility to still participate in Stormont, but go back home to their family and look at the working hours of Stormont. So we actually need to have real conversations. And also, how does a working mum or a working dad who lives in Fermanagh affected by Stormont compared to someone who's in East Belfast? It might be easier to manage a family life if you're in East Belfast than it is in Fermanagh. So we need to look at ways that we can change Stormont to make it more family friendly so we can encourage more people who are younger and with caring responsibilities. That's real politics. That's what we need to do. And that's what the real stuff I want to get involved in. And I want to encourage women and young people to join us in this conversation and join the Ulster Unionist Party. And I've had very good success recently in a number of females joining.
Some women would say, well, why don't you just get the husband to look after the children?
No, let me address that directly. And here's where political correctness doesn't help. Because, first of all, and that's why I said working dads and other people with caring responsibilities. But here's a reality in our society. Whatever the rights and wrongs of it are, the load and the responsibility for childcare often falls on the woman. That is just a reality of our life. And that's a reality of our society. And it's one that we need to address by making sure that we provide and remove obstacles for those hardworking women or hardworking men who have caring responsibilities or children responsibilities to get over those obstacles and get in and make a difference. Because we need more women in our politics. We need more young people. And we need change. And the only way to do that is actually to reach out to them and make it a level playing field for them coming in.
You mentioned change. You mentioned reform of Stormont. Many people talk about reform of Stormont, which would always be quite difficult because of the electoral strength of Sinn Féin and the DUP, unless they both want to go along with the reform. But what reform would you like to see of Stormont?
Well, I talked about... First of all, I think there needs to be something dealt with these non-binding motions. So the amount of time we spend on things that aren't legislative and increase the amount of time spent actually hearing evidence, scrutinising legislation. That's the first thing. The second thing, I think we need a far better opposition. It simply doesn't work. We have a small opposition.
Well, I have to ask you then, are you going to go into opposition then?
Well, I've addressed this point to say that going into opposition this late in the mandate, I don't think would be good for the health service. We hold the health ministry. It wouldn't be good for executive, and we've got to see that job through. And by the way, Mike Nesbitt's done a good job. He's cut waiting lists. He's finding savings, and he's done a very good job.
Okay, I interrupted you there. I apologise.
Yeah. So, long term, I want to start sketching out with my colleagues the sort of changes to Stormont that would make it more efficient and effective and make sure it delivers. So, for example, we should have in Northern Ireland a shadow health minister, a shadow justice minister, shadow minister for the communities, a real vibrant and effective opposition that will break through some of the issues that we've got, that will find solutions, that will bring real scrutiny. They are some of the changes we need to make in Stormont to make it far more efficient and far more effective and far more relatable to the people of Northern Ireland, so that you actually have a sense of collegiate responsibility. What you have at the minute is an executive of vastly different parties. And it's difficult sometimes to make tough decisions because there's a feeling that if you make a tough decision, it's your party that's going to suffer if you hold that ministry. And I think that's why people have avoided tough decisions. And that's why in the long term, things in Northern Ireland haven't been addressed. So we need to fundamentally change Stormont. But I do believe we keep the cross-community protections that are part of the Belfast Agreement. We need those to have trust. And I think there's also a culture change in our politics needed. You know, we do need to look up and out at the world and at our people in Northern Ireland and encourage new people into politics. I think that's so important.
Well, new people into politics, there are a host of directions we could go there. I'm not sure we should. I mean, because you mentioned, value for money, the amount of wages some people would say that MLAs even aren't paid enough. It's difficult to see how we would attract the new people to politics. I'm pivoting there myself, so I apologise for that. In the last week, Gavin Robinson, the DUP, he has a clear proposition for you, Jon. He really has, and I'm just wondering, in terms of what he is proposing. He's talking about unionist cooperation. I just wonder how that would affect in enticing new people into politics. And again, last night, I have a statement just in, and he said, he was speaking in West Belfast, and he believes that unionism could win a seat in West Belfast. And he said, when unionism works together, our people are the winners. Our people, interesting term, not all the people of Northern Ireland, but our people. And I think there lies in the crux of the complications here. And he has been heartened, he says, by the response of grassroots unionists in our call for talks with the incoming Ulster Unionist leader. He's a very clear pitch. You are the smaller party here. It's how are you going to deal with this issue?
Well, I think that I think there's a clarion call in our communities for unionism to work together to maximise the pro-union vote and seats, councils, the Assembly and Westminster. And clearly different election, first past the post versus PR will have a different approach to this. I'm happy to meet Gavin and we'll have conversations. What I said very clearly, I operate a mantra of trust but verify. We need to make sure that those conversations are in the best interests of the people of Northern Ireland and not any particular one party. That's the first thing. And second of all, we can be clear during that what we need to do is scope out what this actually looks like. I mean, is it simply practical cooperation in saying we encourage people to transfer down the ballot paper within the unionist family? Is that something we want to look at? Is it something different when it comes to Westminster? But there is a need for unionism to work together to safeguard the union and advance the union. And I'm up for practical cooperation and discussions. But I need to make three real caveats. First of all, let me be unashamed in this. I want us to be the biggest unionist party in Northern Ireland again. I believe we need the Ulster Unionist Party to lead Northern Ireland in the next 50 years. Number two, we cannot forget the fact there's apathy in unionism. We need to connect with those people who haven't voted for some time. I want to make an offering to them to come out and support us. And number three is we need to have new converts to unionism. We simply can't draw the drawbridge and say, what we have is what we hold. We need to advocate for the union, convert people to unionism, show unionism in a new light. I want to actually change that kind of image of unionism. I grew up where, probably through my police career, I began to feel this sense that republicanism and nationalism was projecting itself as cool. It was about change. It was something aspirational. Unionism was something that was trying to hold back the tide. I want to change that. Unionism is actually a dynamic brand. Unionism believes in looking outwards, east and west, north and south, building new alliances, and values the diversity within our United Kingdom and the security and safety that it provides for everybody. So I will work with Gavin Robinson and discuss things about cooperation. But I need to be very clear. I want us to also be the biggest party in unionism again, and I will not turn my gaze away from getting new converts to the union and attracting those who are apathetic and who haven't voted for us for some time.
Critics of unionist unity, cooperation, I suppose, agreed candidates would say that they would maintain, I think, that in terms of attracting people who haven't voted unionist to date for one reason or another, that cooperation would lower the range of candidates available to them and may leave candidates in place who are extremely unattractive to those potential voters.
Well, that's why you go into these conversations. By the way, Gavin decided to go out with this publicly. He sent me a letter at the same time he put a press statement out. That's why you go into these conversations with clear-eyed reality. You go in with an open mind, but you go in with a degree of caution and you weigh everything up. What is in the long-term interests of the people of Northern Ireland and our union? For too many years, unionism has made short-term decisions that have harmed the union. We need to think in the long term. People, often say the Republicans have a long game. They play a long war. Instead of complaining about that, unionism needs to think more strategically and actually think about protecting the union. What does the union look like in 2050? That's what I'm beginning to think about. Not what it necessarily looks like just in the next election. We need to safeguard our union by thinking very carefully, working together, but also converting people to unionism, dealing with apathy within unionist communities. And yes, if there's practical cooperation to maximise the pro-union vote, let's do that.
Like, with all due respect, if people haven't been converted in the last 400 years, that's a great challenge, and no one has successfully done that yet. So those are massive challenges.
You say massive challenges. Here's what I reflected upon when I came into politics. I grew up in a family where it was just given that you be unionist. Okay, strongly unionist, but vehemently anti-sectarian, by the way. That was the values I was brought up with. I can't remember politicians making the logical case for the union. What I've been sketching out recently is, what is the case for a union in terms of our peace? No one died last year as a result of the troubles in Northern Ireland, as a result of the security situation. That was a record that is really important. We're the most peaceful in terms of these two islands than we've been in centuries. Disorder and rioting has actually stopped as well. Who on earth in their right mind would want to start picking apart the delicate constitutional arrangement we have right now? The case for the union in terms of peace is compelling. But also in terms of our national security, look at the geopolitical world we live in. Things are getting very, very challenging and tricky indeed. Who wants to leave the union when we live under the security umbrella of one of the largest militaries in the world, with a continually at sea nuclear deterrent, protected by GCHQ, and also a founding member of NATO? Who wants to leave NATO at this time? There are so many arguments for us staying in the United Kingdom. We need to make them. Economically, cost of living is more expensive down south. I really like the Irish Republic. I have a family who live there, but I worry about their economy. It's propped up by about 4 or 5 multinational companies that are very vulnerable if there are changes to things like tax arrangements. Yet the United Kingdom, there's a depth to our economy, which meant that actually after the credit crunch, who bailed out the Irish Republic? It was this country with $3.25 billion loan. There is more security being in the United Kingdom for our economy, for our national security, for your safety. There was recently a panorama program last year which showed that organised crime gangs were bringing in drugs into Europe via Irish coastal waters. And the bandits actually said in the radio, stay out of British waters and stay in Irish waters. The Irish have radios, the British have boats. How do we protect Irish coastal waters without Northern Ireland being in the United Kingdom? There's data cables that run between here and America that are absolutely vital. The Russians and Chinese would love to sabotage them. Who protects them? The Royal Navy. People's future is safer and more secure in the United Kingdom. So you say to me, it's hard to convince people that being a unionist is better.
Nationalists are going to just disagree with absolutely, and not only disagree with what you said, John, but for the same reasons, they could all look at about almost everything you said as a negative.
Well, and I went on the radio and debated this with Matthew O'Toole. Okay, and here's the point: nationalists have made the running. They've had their United Ireland and New Ireland forums at hotel meetings. It's time for unionism to get on the front foot, to start playing the compelling cards it has and convince people that you're safer and you're better off in the United Kingdom. And here's the thing. Seeing all of this, the border's invisible. You can be British, Irish, or both, and you can have whatever passport you want. That is a miraculous situation. And Northern Ireland's doing so well with the lowest unemployment in Europe. We've got a booming fintech sector. We've got cyber security that's unparalleled across the world. We feed a quarter of the United Kingdom, despite being 3% of the population. We are very successful in very many ways. Let's be proud of Northern Ireland. I want to get the front foot and advocate for it and tell people why staying in United Ireland, they can feel Irish, but have the security of being in the UK. So I think there's a job to be done, but I think we can convert people to unionism. I want to see unionism grow and not just have what it holds.
That's your pitch on that. That was actually my last question, but you've foreseen that. And that's your pitch, and you made it very well. I think everyone could agree with that. And of course, many people will vehemently disagree with what you said. Now, I'm going to ask you some questions in terms of, one of them here is, would you commit to not walking out of the executive before next year's election? I think you've done that. But there are a few questions in here which I'm not going to ask you detailed policy questions, but there are questions which have been put to politicians, and you have touched on them. Now, we have problems with water and sewage here. Now we have bad weather too, but I can tell you, getting home last night was quite an experience, and there was people from working on the roads to try and keep them open. But we do have critical problems with our roads, with our hospitals, with our education system. There may be a booming private sector at the moment. I'm not disputing that. but we do have many problems. And
I accept those, and that's why I want to change how Stormont does business. That's why the only unionist party has come out and said, I don't want to collapse Stormont. That would be the TUV strategy, which I think would be disastrous for the union. It's not a very good offering to show a failed statelet. Sinn Féin would say that. You'd hand power to Starmer, who might give some power to Dublin. Failed strategy. The DUP, they don't want to reform Stormont. The Ulster Unionist Party, we are up for looking at how Stormont can be different to deliver better for people. I accept, and I'm sitting in front of you accepting, that it is not good enough. The issues that we have in Northern Ireland across public services. People need better.
And in fairness to politicians as well, I think it's okay for Ben Goa to say, you know, in terms of hospitals, and we need to rationalise. I mean, you know better than anyone, how long would it take you to blue light from Kilkeel to Craigavon? You know, if you have a relative having a stroke or a heart attack, you can understand why you'd be saying to your local MLS in Southdown, you know, that's not, you know, we don't, that's not, that's, that, you know, we can understand. People, these aren't irrational fears. Now, you've given the pitch, you've given the pitch for the union, you've given the pitch for yourself, you've given the pitch for the UUP, and it's all been very, very positive. But many of and you've also, you know, spoken on legacy. We spend an awful lot of time in Stormont and on the airways arguing over cultural matters. That's the way it is. For the nationalist community, the vast majority of the nationalist community are either members of the GAA, for example, or are very passionate about the GAA. The Irish language is something which people find, and I quote, divisive, and nevertheless it is an extremely important issue for some people and a moderately important issue for a lot of people. These are things traditionally associated with the nationalist community. How is your UUP going to react to these issues?
I think we'll react to them. We're a party that's pragmatic, tolerant, and inclusive. And actually, you can take the heat out of some of this. Look, I holiday every year in Ireland. I go to Arramore Island, where there's a lot of Irish speaking. My wife tries to learn Irish. It's not great, but she tries. My nieces and nephews are Irish. They live in Dublin. So look, I have no problem with Irishness. The Irish language, I have no problem whatsoever with. But actually, I find it disappointing that, you know, we've got ourselves into a situation with, for example, bilingual signs, whereby some of the rules around how a bilingual sign can go up in the street, even though 90% of the people don't want it. And then it creates an issue that doesn't need to happen. So I think, you know, people toxify issues of symbolism. We can have our aspirations in Northern Ireland. You can aspire to be British, Irish, or both. You can have a dual passport. You can cross the border invisibly. That's a wonderful thing. I respect people's rights to play Gaelic games, speak Irish. It doesn't cause me any flinch whatsoever, but I'll also defend the culture of Britishness, of Northern Irishness. The two can coexist. I have no, it doesn't threaten me that people speak Irish or play GAA. I wish, and I'll say it clearly, I wish GAA stadiums weren't named after people who'd done bad things, or trophies weren't named after people who did bad things. I think there's a journey there for the GAA to go on and to reach out to unionism. But I don't wish ill of any of my neighbours. And I'll tell you why. Actually, I grew up, my grandfather fought in World War II, and there was three men who were best friends, Burrows, Beck and Crangles. Hugh Crangles was from West Belfast. They went over to Sword Beach, they landed, and Hugh Crangles was killed, a Catholic from West Belfast. My grandfather told me, and this is the way I was brought up, that Hugh Crangles died for my future. And therefore, to be patriotic but never be sectarian, to never look down at those people who actually have a different background or aspiration to you. They're the values that went deep in my family. So when my father was at my grandfather's funeral, he sat in the middle of East Belfast and he said that his father was the most patriotic man he knew. He'd served in uniform for years. He would defend his country, but he never once said a sectarian comment in his life. That's what I would like someone to say about me. So I'm anti-sectarian, but I'm proud to be British. And those things don't bother me. But at the same time, we need to be sensible, and we shouldn't spend endless public money on culture when people actually can't get a hospital appointment. And that's just the approach I take to this.
Final question. You are a co-opted MLA.
Yes.
Under the system, you're co-opted to replace a co-opted MLA. So the distance between yourself and the electorate, there is a bit of distance there. I mean, those are the rules, and it does save us money doing this. And of course, it's a multi-seat scenario, so by-elections aren't an option. We understand that. But you are going to have to face the electorate. This is a new thing. You're going to have to go and knock on doors. You're going to have to listen to people. You're confident. You're looking forward to that. You think you've no problem there?
Look, I don't. I say no problem. You got to work for every vote. Thankfully, Robin Swan did a huge job in North Antrim in building an Ulster-Unionist Party vote. I go in the footsteps of that. I look forward to engaging people. I've got a good constituency operation. And I'll tell you this, and I give a pledge to my local constituency association. My priority, no matter what, is to my constituents. So I will work hard to lead the Ulster-Unionist Party. I will work doubly hard to serve the constituents of North Antrim. And that's why I said I wouldn't be giving myself a job like a minister's job, ever. I have a full-time enough job. I'll be leading the party and serving the people of North Antrim, and I'll do both to the best of my ability.
And it'll be up to them.
Up to them to decide.
Jon Burrows, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ciarán.